Good morning, Praggies, and welcome back. We are recording, though this will probably not post, on the birthday of our number one fan, my mother. So, hi, Mom, and thank you for your constant support as always. And hello to everyone else. We're going to be diving into the kind of everywhere, all over Instagram headline that Kim Davis is coming back out of the ether to request that Obergefell be Hodges, the case that guaranteed same-sex marriage across the United States, to request that that be overturned. And we're going to get into what that means. But before we do that, I would just like to take a second to say how upset I am that we are in for another series of news cycles where I have to look at Kim Davis's fuck-ass hairstyle. Like, what is that?
Girl needs a comb.
4 times.
She needs a comb, and she needs to stop being a hater, and also fuck her every day, all day is fuck Kim Davis Day.
I just think that, and I want to be very careful to say that I do not think that women should feel the pressure to aspire to marriage. And also, I think that beauty standards in the United States are really rooted in things like fat phobia and Eurocentrism. But like, Kim Davis is choosing to look the way that she does, so I feel okay roasting her. Like, I feel like I'm a little bit of like the Dexter of mean sorority girls, where I really bring those tendencies back as much as possible, except when somebody really, really deserves it. And I just feel like someone needs to sit and tell Kim Davis that the bump it era is decades in the past. And I am confused about how she has been married 4 times with that like general aesthetic, because I understand how people that look like they would join a cult get married once, but I kind of thought that divorce was disqualifying. I don't know. Just a weird messenger for the sanctity of marriage all around.
And so, Rachel, now that Kim Davis is horrifying our news feeds once again with her cringe aesthetic and her terrible thoughts, one thing that this reminds me of, and not just like terrible thoughts, like she is a disgraced clerk. Like, this is someone who has already had to account for her fuck acidness because she illegally denied Kentucky couples a marriage license after the Obergefell ruling, and is now trying to bring herself back to relevance from the dead under the guise of overturning marriage equality, which we both know is just another tactic to distract all of us from the real core issues that are plaguing our communities: the cost of living, affordability, actual healthcare access for queer people, protecting our trans communities, access for education resources for LGBT plus youth, fertility treatment for parents of all types and makeups and family statuses who are looking to expand their families, but because of our healthcare system don't have access to fertility research, PrEP and PEP coverage, and the divestment from our federal government in common sense research tools that will end things and prevent things like HIV and AIDS in our communities. But that's just a long laundry list of things that this news cycle is distracting us from. But what is your hot take on why the fuck Kim Davis is trying to weasel her way back into the limelight from the cockroach den that she crawled out of?
This is like the most brutal episode we've had by a lot, but God, we hate Kim Davis. And I think it's important to note that Tiara and I were like coming of age during the first Kim Davis iteration. Like, she holds a very deep kind of, I have such a visceral reaction to having her back on my feed. So my hot take, and I want to be very clear, that when we refer to this as a distraction, which you and I both certainly believe it is not because we doubt that Republicans are coming after marriage equality. I very much believe that Republicans are coming after Obergefell. And I know that, I mean, as our viewers know, the way that you and I really got to know each other was through advocacy that was in preparation for the overturn of Roe. And people would try and gaslight us into saying that that was never going to happen. And then it happened not even 5 years later. And so when we say that this is a distraction, I want to talk through what I mean by that, because I very much think it is a distraction from all of the things that you listed, and also from the Epstein files. And also, and you listed this, but I guess I want to just really pull it out. The focus on Obergefell in this moment is distracting people from cases that the Supreme Court has already said it's going to hear that attack trans people. That will be the actual vehicle for attacks on non-trans members of the LGBTQ community. That requires, to fully understand that, we have to understand how cases get to the Supreme Court in the first place. So when you work your way up through the court system, before you go to the Supreme Court, you have to file something called a petition for a writ of certiorari. And I just call that a cert petition, as do most people, because I don't think that we really know how to pronounce it. And I'm not sure that that last one was right. So you file a cert petition. The cert petition asks the Supreme Court to hear your case. If they don't hear your case, whatever the lower court said that you're petitioning up from, that just stands. Kim Davis has filed a cert petition. The cert petitions include something called questions presented, and the questions presented lay out explicitly the issue that the court is being asked to decide. So Kim Davis has filed this cert petition asking the court to overrule Obergefell. That has grabbed so many headlines, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has not granted that cert petition. And I, and pretty much every other kind of legal commenter that I know, none of us think that they're going to grant it. And that's not because the court doesn't want to overturn Obergefell. They've made it very clear. And in fact, when Samuel Alito wrote Dobbs, when Dobbs came out, these were my fresh-faced TikTok years. When Dobbs came out, I and many other people logged in and said, Samuel Alito is carving out Obergefell, and he's carving out Lawrence v. Texas, which also made it illegal to criminalize sodomy. And so he's saying people were very concerned about the overturn of Roe, that it would lead to overturns of many other things, right? And all of those concerns are legitimate, but some of them are more likely than others. Like, I've been getting a lot of discussion around like Loving v. Virginia, which allowed interracial marriage, because that too was kind of discussed in the Dobbs opinion. Samuel Alito carved out Lawrence and Obergefell when he was talking about the status of different precedent after the overturn of Roe in this Dobbs opinion, and said, the people asking us to keep Roe rely on this precedent consistently, but that precedent came after Casey. So you can't rely on that. Very basic thing that's important to understand is that the way that the law works in the United States, especially at the Supreme Court level, is that they're just interpreting their own past opinions. And they kind of build out the law from what the court has said in the past, for the most part. So when he says Lawrence and Obergefell are no longer, aren't relevant here to consider as part of the law that's been built out that we're considering, that's a pretty clear indicator that if Sam Alito has his druthers, he overturns those cases. So all of that to say, people are right to be concerned about the potential rollback of marriage. They are wrong to be chicken littling about this Kim Davis petition that hasn't even been granted, because it will not be the vehicle. Not just because I don't think that the court would want to do that before the midterm elections. They saw what happened with Dobbs, but also because it's not a very good case for it. Like, when the court wants to overturn something, they want someone who has been directly impacted in a way that Kim Davis has not. And so it's just, she's basically saying, I don't want to pay a fine for not issuing a marriage license, and so you should overturn Obergefell. It's not a good argument. And also, they don't have the precedent yet. They're going to build it out over time as they chipped away at abortion access. And they are doing that on an expedited schedule because they feel like they have so much power. But that doesn't mean that they're going to take this case. What we should be paying attention to is that they have already granted cert in 2 cases that open the door for them to continue crafting that precedent that they need to overturn Obergefell based on decisions related to trans athletes, a whole 10 people in the NCAA right now. And so They granted I was going to say certiorari again, but I don't think I can do it. If anyone, I apologize to all of our commenters who wanted to learn how to pronounce that word. Don't take my guidance on it. So they granted cert in two different cases that they're going to hear together. One is called Hecox v. Little. It comes out of Idaho. The other is West Virginia versus, I have it up, but West Virginia, or BPJ versus West Virginia. And these cases have questions presented that focus on what degree of deference or what degree of like suspect class LGBTQ Americans are. That is, sorry, this is a ranter, but there's a lot of things that I think we need to understand. There's a lot of pieces here.
Go off, girl.
Thank you. And so when the court decides whether or not you can discriminate against a group under the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution, which says everyone has equal protection under the law, when they decide whether or not a law violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution, they apply different tests based on what the group is. So, for example, it is totally legal for a state to say, we are not going to allow people that live in this part of the state to participate in like this federal program. And unless there's very obvious like animus towards that group of people that live in like this region of the state, or if it's obviously connected to a protected class like race, then usually you can just do that as long as it's connected to a legitimate government purpose or objective. And so on like the flip side of that, if you have a law that says like Black people can do one thing, white people can do another, that's subject to a much higher level of scrutiny. You have to have really, really, really legitimate purposes for doing that, which was bastardized by the Supreme Court when it overturned affirmative action, right? Like, and so race is like extremely high degree of scrutiny. And then there's an intermediate level of scrutiny that they've historically applied to gender, based on the idea that there are kind of differences between men and women biologically. Sorry, itchy nose. And so what is an open question that the court is being asked to decide is what level of scrutiny do we give when a law is discriminating against trans people? And in Scrimeti, which we talked about, was the trans healthcare case, Amy Coney Barrett actually wrote a separate opinion, a concurring opinion, that said, just for the record, I don't think that trans identity is a suspect class. We didn't get to it in this case, but just so you know, if someone wanted to come and ask me, do you think that trans identity is a suspect class? I would say no. And that's obviously true for Alito and Thomas. John Roberts has become a huge follower. I think Gorsuch is the question there, but I think we'll almost certainly go along with it as well. And I think that Kavanaugh is likely certain. Like, I think they have the majority there. Gorsuch might split because every once in a while he's like genuine in how he interprets the law, and did that in one case called Bostock related to trans identity prior. So who knows with him, but they have it regardless, probably. What the court can do here is, even if they don't say it in their opinion that they end up putting out related to trans people, even if they don't say it, they can use whatever they decide, which will be that trans identity is not a suspect class. They will use that to say that queer identity broadly is not a suspect class. And that is a necessary predicate to overturning Obergefell, which rested on both the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. So all of this to say, people are right to be worried. I don't know if this was also your experience. I suspect that it was. My newsfeed and my stories and everything else were saturated with people posting in panic about Kim Davis, many of whom in the same breath will say that they distance themselves from, the trans issue, or that they think that we've gone too far. They think that, trans issues are unpopular and so we should leave them alone. that is how they get you. You should care about trans people because they are people and we love them. But if you cannot get there for whatever reason, while you are figuring that out, why that is, you better care about rights for trans people, because it is always going to be the least defended, least popular minorities that open the doors to policy change that eventually comes for us all in a fascist authoritarian society. And I think that we have touched on that in recent episodes, just in terms of speech and due process and all of these other things related to Palestinians as well. Like, I think that where we're seeing it broadly with a huge group of literally just anyone Latinx on the streets, like what we allow to happen to the most scapegoated groups in this country will eventually happen to all of us. And so that is the end of, that's perfect timing, because that was the end of my wrap up of like everything that's happening in those cases. Reactions. And also, I would love to hear things that people can engage on to protect trans and queer people in their own communities.
Yes, and Rachel, thank you for that thorough summary, because this is not something that just popped up out of nowhere. This has been a coordinated effort since the Obergefell ruling for the conservative wing of this country that is also facilitating the Christian nationalist fascist regime that they are building in order to get to this point. And I also saw a quote a couple days ago from, I believe it was Ta-Nehisi Coates, that if you thought that a community and a government that didn't draw the line at genocide was going to draw the line at fascism and at our democracy, you were wrong, because the same conditions that lead us to accepting a televised, man-made starvation campaign and genocidal government is the same exact government that's going to watch our democracy cede to a Christian fascist cult leader. Like, these are the same conditions. And another thing that I want to bring up is that we were both little baby activists when marriage equality was the big social movement of our time. When we ended at marriage as the litmus test and as the crown jewel of LGBTQ plus rights, we missed an opportunity to push the needle in some communities, not every single community. I am fortunate to live in the Northeast Corridor, where Rhode Island passed marriage equality before the federal ruling. We also have parentage equality. We've been working on codifying other LGBT plus protections. We have PrEP and PEP coverage. My state is also home to a research institute at Brown University where they're doing research on PrEP and PEP and on LGBT plus health campaigns and how it can make a whole population healthier. But I want to also focus on some of the hope that I feel in here. While there are valid concerns, and I'm going to point to some resources, mostly from GLAD Law, which has a really great partnership with National Center for Lesbian Rights, Collage, Family Equity, and Movement Action Project on tools that you can take right now in order to protect your marriage if you are concerned. Some things include estate planning docs, making sure that you have LGBTQ plus or not our viewers, power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and a will set up. And you can do that with some of the resources on GLAD Law, again, with that really great partnership. And I also want to be clear that even if Obergefell were to be overturned at the end of this year or during this administration, there are still states, similar to what happened with the Dobbs decision, that have codified a marriage equality into their state laws. So even if this decision were to be overturned, there are 16 states. I believe not all of those states have constitutional protections, but there are 16 states that have statutes that protect marriage equality. And there are states where you can still get married. Your existing marriages under Obergefell will still be recognized. And it'll potentially be like what the world was between 2010 and 2014 in that decision, where people were going to other states to get married and then going back to their home state. So this is not the end of marriage equality. This is not the end of marriage. It'll make it harder for some communities to access marriage. But that does not mean it's going to end. And again, I want to encourage people to think beyond marriage as the ultimate goal for protecting our communities, especially the most vulnerable LG plus communities, our trans community, our trans youth, our intersex community, who are often forgotten. I want people to focus on how we got to devaluing the T in LGBTQ plus community, our young people. We got there because we weren't focused on how do we continue to push the needle on a social movement to respect our rights and the rights of everyone. Human beings, no matter how you identify, no matter who you are at the core of your being, are deserving of respect, are deserving of quality healthcare, are deserving of housing. And as we see the attacks on trans communities, as we see the attack on homelessness, the takeover in DC is not removed from protecting LGBT plus and trans people. Trans youth between the ages of 18 and 24 are more likely to experience homelessness because they are removed and kicked out of their communities and oftentimes don't have the support systems they need in order to build up the next stage of their life. And so as we see national headlines that we can connect the dots all day, we can pull threads all day, there are some tools and resources that you can do. Changing state statutes and changing state constitutions is an uphill battle, which is why the Obergefell decision was such a win for people who were working to change state policies, but it is not the end. And one thing that I think gives me hope is that I think so many more people are tired. They are run down. They are looking at the headlines and they are saying, does anyone care about us? Is anyone going to fight for us? And people are raising their hands every single day, whether it is this I won't say a false alarm because that is not recognizing the moment that we are in, but this is a distraction from the government takeover that we see happening in DC. Rachel Maddow has now said, we are in a authoritarian government. Like, this is authoritarianism. People wake up. So many thought leaders, so many news anchors, so many pundits on all of the social media platforms, no matter where you're getting your information from, have been telling us this is how they are trying to take over our government. This is how they have taken over a government, from the courts to legislatures and to the executive office now of the United States. We need to be prepared to be able to sift through the news that they are trying to give us and to really get behind, what are they not trying to show us now? What are they trying to hide from us? Because while it's a distraction, I believe the Supreme Court won't even look at these cases that they've been asked to do search for until October. So we might not even hear if they're going to take up this case for a few more months. So this is going to linger in the news cycle. But one thing we know for sure, DC is currently under siege. ICE is still recruiting people to disappear your community members off the street. Epstein files have still not been released, and we do still have a pedophile sympathizer in office. And a felonious one at that, one who has multiple felonies. And so I want people to really take a moment to, of course, take in the headlines, process them, but then also think, what do they not want me to know? And why is this the tagline of the day, the week, and the hour? Because there is so much going on. They told us from the beginning, it's going to be the blitzkrieg. It's going to be information overload, and we're not going to be able to sift through those headlines. But I am hopeful that as people start to learn how to filter out, learn how to build stronger community networks, and really see the strategies that they're using for distraction and for disinvestment and engagement as another tool and another rallying cry for us to rally our communities, strengthen our communities, and really learn tools to stand up for the most marginalized. When we throw trans people and migrants under the bus, our democracy is weaker. When we throw trans communities and homeless people and other people who are experiencing the most marginalized parts of our country under the bus, our democracy weakens, our democracy wanes, and then all of us are even more vulnerable. When the most marginalized are attacked, we are just moments away from you, your neighbors, your family, the people that you love, also being on the chopping block. And so now we've gone on for a really long rant, and I hate that it was because of that cockroach, Kim Davis, but I hope we can leave people with the optimism that while things are bad and while the headlines do tell us to feel fear, there are a lot of safeguards that activists that I know have been have been doing on the state side to ensure that even with an overturn of Obergefell, there are states where you can still get married. There are resources for you and your loved ones, especially if you do have a marriage. And if you have children, to protect your parentage status, to have a healthcare proxy, and to ensure that your will and your estates are taken care of. But let's push for healthcare. Let's push for education. Let's push for trans identity documents to be given and more easy name changes. Let's advocate for more PrEP and PEP coverage and research into common sense vaccinations and prophylaxis that save lives and save communities and reduce the transmission of deadly diseases.
And I think that's a great place to leave it. We're pushing back so that we can push forward. The other analogy that I'm using is that we're in stages of grief for the democracy, but we need y'all to get to acceptance quick, because we need to start to have more people plug in to support and uplift the work that activists have been doing for a really long time. And that is always my optimism, is that people have been doing this work for a long time, and it will not take you that long to find them. So thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to Legal AF on the Midas Touch platform. You can follow Tiara and myself, Cohen 489 and Mack District 6. And we'll see you next time.
Bye, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.